Good morning. Welcome to Fossil Creek Nursery classes. Today we're going to talk about planting for privacy. There are a lot of things to think about and a lot of things to accomplish before you make a sensible decision regarding what you're going to use and how much money to spend and the like. So first of all, we want to define your needs. Is this a neighbor in close proximity, just over a fence? Is this a distant view of something that is offensive to you or the eye regarding sitting outside? Is it a view from a window on a first floor or a second floor that might be at issue here to mitigate? There are a few things you can do structurally. So let's talk first about defining your needs. If you are in a small neighborhood, a new neighborhood that's typically a residential yard, limited in size, and it is the neighbor next door or the neighbor behind you, there's not much you can do in the way of fencing other than a 6-foot stockade fence, the wooden closed panel fencing. There's nothing legally beyond that in most instances above 6 feet. Growing vines on the fence is not going to do anything to mitigate the view. Vines at the most would grow 6 inches or a foot, mounding upon themselves on top of the fence as they mature. So the obvious choices then become a planting of some sort of something taller. And it could be an upright juniper or a deciduous tree or shrub of some sort that grows in a vertical fashion. So the first order of business is to go to the location from which you can see the offending view. It might be a bedroom window or a living room or a family room window that you frequent a lot, you look out of, and by gosh, that ugly thing is there. Then you have to take a photograph from there and look at what's in the background and look at the angle of something in your yard, a marker on a fence or something like that. I would have someone else stand outside, talk through the window, or stand on a patio and direct them left or right to say, stop right there. The view is now mitigated and covered. If you can do that and then measure that distance, that gives you an idea of how many plants you may need and how close together they may be planted. Now, understand that plants have a growth potential, and if you don't put them close enough, they are going to not grow together enough to truly block the view. They will affect the view. They will intermittently block the view, but the closer they are together, or if they grow together at the base, like this, all plants have a point to which they grow. Even big-shaped deciduous trees that grow more in a ball shape all have an apex. So choosing the plant for the space allotted is a critical factor. So you're planting in a bed that might be 3 foot wide along a stockade fence. If that's the case, you don't have a lot of choices with which to fill that 3 foot wide void. So there are options among all the plants available to you and locations you can utilize that you may not think of to effectively block the view. So is the view internal to the house? Is it something you see from a window and you could block it by potentially planting a shade tree in the yard between you and that property line? That closer to you, the closer it gets, the more you block. The further away, the less you block. So that's an option. If that is not a real opportunity for you and you want to do something along the fence, now you're more limited. So the go-to deal is to first decide what kind of exposure these plants are going to get. Do they get full sun? Are they in heavy shade? Is there a lot of wind? Do you have an option to build a berm that may raise the plant initially from where you plant it? If that's the case, and you can get a 2 or 3 foot berm, you gain that 2 or 3 feet instantly. But you must understand how plants grow, because they don't grow as quickly as you would like. Anytime a plant is transplanted, and it might be a petunia in May, or it may be a big spaded evergreen tree that's 15 feet tall with the biggest spade available. No matter what it is, it must develop root structure before it builds a family above the ground. Plants are afforded by evolution a brain, if we can give them that. And that brain, that awareness of survival, tells it that it must have a job that creates a lot of income and a savings account with money in it before it spends money on a family and a fancy car and a house. Now, unlike some young people who get a credit card and max it out right away and then can't pay it off and pay huge interest on a monthly basis, plants don't do that. Everything is about root structure with plants. No matter what plant we're talking about, the first thing it focuses upon about after being transplanted is developing a viable root structure. The root structure is the job. In order to feed the family above the ground, the roots must take up sufficient nutrients and water to mix with the carbon dioxide it gets from the air and the sunlight from the sun to make carbohydrates. That's what it eats. And without food to eat, it does not grow. So hair roots are what take up the vital nutrients in the water. The bigger, thicker roots that get bigger and bigger and bigger over time act as foundation roots and as a bank account in which the carbohydrates it makes are stored. So it behooves you, for a healthy plant, to first develop the root structure as quickly as possible so you get top growth to cover the area that's offending and block the view. There is no magic formula here. There is no way to avoid developing the root structure. Can't happen. But you can enhance the ability of the plant and the speed with which it produces roots by giving it the right fertilizer with the right additives in the fertilizer. So the right fertilizer for roots is the middle number of the 3 that you see on a fertilizer packet. The first is nitrogen, the N, and that builds the family above the ground. Twigs, branches, and leaves. You don't want to feed it a lot of that early because the plant has to have the income and the savings to pay cash for that family. So you want to feed the middle number, phosphorus. The first job of phosphorus is to produce roots. And it is a very focused effort on the part of plants. But if you add to that high middle number a root stimulating hormone, and hormones in nature are very specific in their focus. They don't do a whole lot of things. They do one thing, and they do it very well. Root stimulating hormone aids in root development quickly. So if you add a high middle number fertilizer according to the directions on the container, and it has a root stimulating hormone in it, Now that plant's going to become established sooner and more assuredly, and then the top growth will happen. In the nursery industry, we use 3 words for the first 3 years of growth on a newly transplanted plant. The first is no. You won't see it a lot above the ground. There's a lot happening, but it's all happening below ground. And the roots are being developed feverishly by a plant with every asset at its disposal. The second year is slow. You will see top growth, more than the first year, but not as much as when the roots are fully developed. The third year is grow, and that's when you see a tremendous amount of growth on top. When the plant has developed the bank account and the big time job to create a big income in order to have and support the family above ground. So everything you can do to develop the root structure early will help your cause. So let's look at options. The options are not many, but they are very focused in their commonality of being able to solve the problem. The first is the common one of upright junipers. A lot of people don't like junipers. They're hardy here. They're hybridized from a native plant, a 1-seed juniper for the most part. And they grow relatively quickly, and they're evergreen. And the thing about evergreen is it gives you year-round protection from that view, privacy, a screen. Now, if you're only worried about when you use your deck, and you're pretty much on the deck only in the summer, then a deciduous variety might work very well. Things like columnar buckthorn or a colonnade apple tree, columnar apple tree that grows upright, not big and wide, but vertically. And if you planted a few of those, they'd provide you with the added benefit of harvesting some apples. Not a bad idea. But they lose their leaves, and they're not very thickly branched. So in the winter, the few branches that are far apart are going to give you a partial screen, not a full screen. So as a result, you might want to stick with the evergreen if in fact you use your patio or your deck frequently in the winter. You're out to barbecue or whatever, or out on the warm days. Or the view is from a family room window that you're in all the time year-round. So you got to define that need first of all, and then narrow the choices down depending on whether you want full season coverage or not. So let's talk about the evergreens first. There are a number of varieties of upright juniper that would work, and once established, will grow quickly and much taller than that 6-foot fence. If you get something like a skyrocket, and the name would imply something tall and narrow, like a rocket trail of exhaust headed up to the moon. That's kind of skinny, and you'd need a whole lot of those, and that would cost a lot of money and not be very effective. Now, if you got a color green spearmint or like-typed juniper that have a much wider bottom and grow in a fuller form, even though they are pinnacle at the top, they would be a wiser choice. But if you have a very narrow space and you don't want them to grow wide out above your lawn or into a walkway, they might not be the best of choices unless you're willing to do some pruning on a periodic or seasonal basis. So that might work. They'd certainly do the job of being full. How many times have you driven around? Maybe you're not even a gardener or horticulturist, but you see someone planted a spruce tree, a native Colorado blue spruce, 3 feet from the driveway because it was real cute. It looks so good there as a little plant. And now they've had to carve a gigantic cutout out of the tree just to pull the car in the garage or in the driveway even. That's foolish and not very far-sighted. So you want to look ahead as you choose your plant to the future. In any case, that won't be an issue for a few years. Remember the 3-year rule in establishing the root structure. And then you've given it enough room within the bed, width-wise, to be able to go ahead and grow and fill in. Width matters, and spacing between the plants matters. So if a plant is prescribed or written about as having a growth potential in width of 5 feet, you divide that in half from the center or the trunk of the tree, and it will grow 2.5 feet on average from one side and 2.5 feet from the other side. If you are spacing these out, unless you want them to grow together like a hedge, and privet would be something you would plant like that you could then trim all along, and it would become an even hedge that didn't look like individual plants, then you would plant them closer. But if you divide that width number that they're going to grow in total, half of which is on one side of the trunk and half on the other, then you plant them the full width apart, so 2.5 feet will grow from one tree, 2.5 feet from the other tree, and they'll touch or come close. And that would then begin to screen the view. If you are looking for noise abatement along with visual screening, that noise abatement does not come with deciduous trees in the winter. If the noise is a bunch of kids on the trampoline bouncing up and down, that might annoy you or visually detract from your enjoyment of the backyard. Mostly they're on the trampoline in the summer, and maybe deciduous would work. So understanding location, exposure, sun, shade, what will grow there, what will thrive there, and what won't, whether it'll be exposed to the wind. So arborvitae is not a good choice in most of these cases, because if you lose one or two, which could happen with arborvitae, since they're not native here and they're susceptible to the winds and the dry climate here in the high plains of Colorado, the high desert of Colorado, then you're not making a good choice. And the objective here is to get to privacy ASAP with longevity, not to have one of them die and now you have a giant hole and it looks ugly. So hardiness matters here, as well as quick growth. So let's look at the options of the potential of a berm. So if you have a bigger yard or a bigger property, even without a fence, the possibility of a berm is there. But to get a 3-foot berm in height, you have to have a 9-foot wide base to that berm to support the slope that you don't want as Mount Everest. That does not work. So you have to regulate the slope to the point where you have a gentleness to the slope. That creates a lot of width to the berm to get that height. So if you don't have those options, berms are out. What other options besides an expensive row of plants do I have in selecting that plant that'll give me privacy? Well, one choice is a vine. But vines have to grow on something. They don't just grow up on their own. They have no structural integrity. So therefore, a trellis would be a great need. But what kind of trellis? Do you want a vertical trellis? That's not going to support a heavy vine if it's a little thin piece of light wood that's hatched or whatever. to hold the vine that it can grow through. So maybe a trellis like an arbor trellis, like a tunnel trellis, might be a good option, or a double-sided trellis that will provide multiple support with heavier structural support beams or support columns like you would a gazebo or a pergola. That gets to be expensive, requires some construction knowledge. You could use some string or some rope, like is done, or wire in a vineyard between strong supports. That may work, but you got to get that son of a gun over 6 feet. So there are many different options, but almost none are structural in their totality, like a giant border wall fence. You don't have that option legally or financially, perhaps. So it ends up being something that grows and something that's green. So let's look at varietals or species that would work and list them out. The first might be that upright juniper. As much as you may not like juniper, they will fill the bill. They'll grow quickly, they're hardy, they're strong, they're full, they're evergreen. In lieu of not wanting to do upright juniper and still sticking with an evergreen, the more expensive option, but more attractive in most eyes, is a columnar Norway spruce. They're very vertical. They're beautiful green in color. They are not sharp and spiny, but they are very, very attractive trees that are hardy to grow here. In any and all cases, a good mulch in the bed is optimal for root growth and root development and longevity and health and hardiness of the tree. Deciduous options, columnar, buckthorn, we mentioned earlier. They have a very thick branching structure on top of each other. So even when the leaves fall, that columnar buckthorn branching will in fact help to screen your view. But they don't grow very wide. They're very vertical. So in lieu of that, maybe a columnar oak variety. Now there are white oaks that grow well here. And in fact, in Fort Collins on Harmony and College, on the west side of that intersection, south of the McDonald's and across from the gas station, is a berm, a center island berm with those upright columnar oaks in them. They're very mature and full. That'd be a place to go and look, perhaps, easy to get to see what they're like as they mature and grow. So clearly, with that kind of branching as well, when the leaves fall, or when they turn brown rather, they don't fall for the most part. Oaks retain their leaves well into the fall and winter often, and a columnar will keep its leaves inside even after the winter is over. So they will provide a full and heavy screening, and if you place those relatively close together, that would do the job. So let's talk about English or Cheyenne Privet. The species of privet, Cheyenne, low dense, golden vickery, are all in that genus of privets that are the greatest hedge plants in the world. They're used on every continent for appropriate and full hedging. But in order to make a hedge, they generally require a little, not necessarily frequent pruning, but they will grow together and they will be thick and quite hardy. On 57th Avenue, south of the nursery, south of the Walmart on College in North Loveland, going west on 57th Avenue, there's a trailer park on the north side. And there's a very old Cheyenne hedge there, been there for decades, and you can see how that grows, although it's gotten old enough that there are some of the plants that are not as viable now. They grow quickly and they are very full. They retain their leaves later into the fall. They're very waxy type leaves. They get them early in the spring and they make a great hedge. So those are an option. Maybe you can combine some of these things to not make a hedge, but have a grouping of upright juniper and then have a columnar Norway near it on the other side, or go from that point and do some mixed varietals that would make sense from a design perspective. So let's review the steps again. Define the needs. What are the parameters and dimensions that I have to fill? Mark them in the garden and measure them. Then decide on the type of plant and the seasonal need. Do I need it year-round or do I just need it in the summertime? Then you can choose between evergreen and deciduous. You can choose between the height needs, because often 8 feet is enough to do the job visually. So let's talk now, after we've talked about along the property line and along a fence in a narrow bed, taking a deciduous tree of some sort, planting it in the yard, and visually blocking the view from your most commonly used area. That might be a patio or a deck. It might be a back porch or even a front porch. Certain trees don't have to be, you don't have to use a large shade tree to accomplish the job. Sometimes a smaller ornamental tree like a hawthorn, and if you don't like the fruits or the thorns, there are thornless varieties and fruitless. You can get a ornamental tree that you plant closer to where you would be seated or where you would be active in need of that privacy, and it would do the job alone, a lot less expensive and quite attractive for the yard. So there are many options available, but limited in their scope. So come here to the nursery, take some photographs for sure. Be sure you do the measurements I have recommended. And then maybe we can help you select the varietals that might do the best job, either alone in a line or in combination, to solve the problem of that bad view. Now, I have the option here to try to answer some questions for you. So if you do have questions, feel free to ask them along the way, and I would be delighted to answer. Excuse me a second here. Liz, would you come on over for a moment? One of the things that's critical, let me look at some of these here. I don't see any specific questions. Hi, Deb. How are you? Very nice to see you as well. I probably owe you a phone call. If you have questions, please include them. And if not, write them down. Come visit us here at the nursery. And if you do that, with the photographs, with the measurements, we can easily give you guidance, take a walk through the nursery, and help you find those plants that would solve your needs. So I thank you for visiting and coming with us today. Look forward to our next opportunity and wish you the best. So come see us at every opportunity here at Fossil Creek, whether in person or the classes we offer. We have a whole list coming up of fun stuff, some of them free, some of them paid. But we enjoy every one of them and sharing them with you. Until next time, take care and happy gardening.